What do we got in the news today? Mass tourism protests squirt water at Barcelona tourists. Okay. Let's see what's happening here. So there's some tourists sitting in a cafe balcony, and there's a major mass anti-tourism protest right here. They have water guns. They're shooting water at them. You can see the tourists are smiling, but clearly uncomfortable. Not physically harmful, but pretty embarrassing. Tourists go home. So here we are. The anti-tourist protests are growing. This is something I've been aware of as a traveler for several years now. I've heard murmurings of it across Europe, across Latin America, but it seems like in the last couple of years, particularly with inflation rising, it's becoming an increasingly large issue. And I think there's a couple of levels to this issue. There's one level that has actually existed for a long time, and then there's a second level that is relatively new. The level that's always kind of existed is, let's be honest, tourists are not always the most respectful people. Sometimes they treat the world like their playground. They leave trash. They drink till 3 a.m. and they annoy the neighbors. They, will stop like the flow of locals so that they can have lineups and take selfies in front of a pretty building or something. If you're living somewhere that gets a lot of tourists, it can just kind of be annoying to deal with after a while. But there's a second level that is relatively new, and it has to do with this environment of high inflation that we're living in and soaring housing prices. The reason this interests me is it reminds me of something that's happening in Montreal. So I recently made a video going around filming a lot of graffiti, and at the end of this video, I filmed a building in a neighborhood called Hochelaga, which is a very local area in Montreal, which is beginning to gentrify. Now the story here, this building was freshly built in this more affordable, more local neighborhood in Montreal. And as you can see, this is not just like street art. This is cans of paint that was thrown by protesters when it was found that as soon as this building that was promised for affordable housing for the community was built, a number of Airbnbs popped up in this new building. And the people of the neighborhood did a big protest. They responded by throwing paint on it. And as you're about to see, they left some specific messages as well. Had the Airbnb EC, that means no Airbnb here. Hochelaga, that neighborhood, for the citizens, not for the tourists. F gentrification. Tourists go home, which is kind of becoming the rallying cry of this movement. There's a situation where people feel like their communities are disappearing under their own, 2 feet. Places that they knew as one place when they were young are changing. And the irony is it's kind of happening around the world. In richer countries like Canada that have high levels of immigration, you sometimes have people saying, why do we have so many immigrants coming when we can't afford houses ourselves? That's usually seen as more of a conservative talking point, and other people, are okay with immigration. It's not like the whole country doesn't want immigrants or anything like that. But the tourist situation, it's kind of like the immigration situation flipped on its head. It's people who are somewhere that is, it doesn't have to be a poor country, but a place with a moderate economy, somewhere like Spain, that's getting a lot of tourists from richer countries who are willing to pay more for rent, willing to pay more for food, willing to go wild on costs for a month or two because they save money. And in so doing, at scale, this causes prices to go up. It causes gentrification. It causes locals who have lived there and worked hard their whole lives to have to move out. And yeah, it's having an enormous strain on a lot of major cities around the world. Now, what I like about this situation, and you can have different opinions on vandalism. I'm not necessarily saying I'm going to go out there and do that, or that you should go out there and do that. But what I prefer about this versus this situation is not actually going to change anything. I mean, I guess their idea is we're going to frighten tourists. They're going to see this news. And it is possible that a family of 5, like let's say you're a dad from England or Ireland, or I don't know where he's from, Poland, who knows. But let's say you're a family of 5 who's planning a vacation, and you check the Polish news and you see, hey, they're squirting water guns at fancy restaurants. That might make you think twice before booking your trip to Barcelona, lest you be victim of water guns like this. But really, if you want to affect change at a larger scale, it's the people in your city who are allowing every single new build to be filled with Airbnbs, who are pricing out local people. Another level to this issue is with the rise of online jobs. It's become easier and easier to be a digital nomad or someone who works online and lives in a more affordable country. And every time someone does that and then tells their friends back home, hey, like, what are you working in San Francisco for, paying $3,000 a month? Come to Thailand, pay $400 a month. And every time more people follow this path, the price in Thailand might go up from $400 a month to $800 a month to $1,000 a month. And for the people from San Francisco, it's still cheap because they're used to paying $3,000 a month. But for the people from Thailand, it just went up from we had a comfortable life to life is very expensive to we can't afford to live in our own city. And that's the problem. I saw another picture about this months ago, which I saved. Check this out. This must be a local Barcelona magazine. I don't know the Barcelonian, so I can't tell you exactly what they stand for, but this image, pretty striking and pretty clear to me. On the left, in the shadows, barely visible, you have this older local family who's clearly lived in Barcelona their whole lives. And on the right, you have a couple of tourists, the guy looking forward, happy to have his vacation, oblivious to what's happening. And I found this image striking because the woman is looking back with a bit of sadness on her face, maybe the creeping awareness of, oh wait, I am part of the problem, as she wears an I Love Barcelona t-shirt. The thing is, there's always 2 types of people. You know, there's the type of person who's like the guy who's looking forward, who's completely oblivious to the social realities of the place they're visiting. Like, literally, they're just focused on their vacation. And if you told them, or tried to tell them, that they're causing a difficult situation for that city, they wouldn't even understand what you're talking about. Or they would say you're crazy, or they would say, well, that's not my problem. Then there's people like the woman who is looking back. They are engaged in the activity of tourism, but they're beginning to understand the impact they're having. It doesn't stop them from traveling for the most part, but there is an awareness of, okay, something is wrong. Like, why is that happening? You know, am I the baddie? Am I the problem here? That is perhaps the first reason I want to make a video like this, to try and get a few people to move from that forward-looking glance to just looking around and being aware of what's happening. The issue with the water gun approach is that people aren't going to understand. Individuals are not going to see a tourist go home and get hit by a water gun and intellectualize that they're part of the problem or come up with any solution. And while it might feel good for these people who have anger at the change of their city, maybe these people are thinking they're going to become like that older couple, priced out of their own city. But the thing is, there are landlords and there are city officials who are making the policies that decide how much tourism arrives and what neighborhoods they can go to, and ensures that local people have affordable places to live. And when they fail on their promises, Montrealers, at least, a small group of Montrealers in this neighborhood in particular, make their messages clear. They show people, guess what? You're not going to take this building and give it to tourists. We would rather no one have it. We're going to destroy this place before we give it to tourists. Now, some people who are, perhaps like the protesters, might think there's a very simple answer, which is just stop traveling, just stop coming here. We clearly don't want you here. I am not in favor of that as a solution. There's a big discussion as to why I'm not. To make a long story short, I think that travel is a very important force in this world when done correctly, when done with an awareness of the places you're traveling to, when done with an intent to actually learn about this new culture and meet interesting people. It helps them and it helps you. It can give you new ideas for ways to improve yourself or your own city when you go home. It can bring cultures that are very different, some kind of mutual understanding. I think that it's an antidote to racism and all the kinds of prejudice that we see in this world. Let's say you're someone who grew up in the United States and you never actually interacted with like Muslims in your country or community. If you travel to somewhere like Morocco or the Middle East and you are greeted with amazing hospitality, as these countries are known for, from any traveler I know who's been there, it's like it will immediately change your perspective, and it will show you, I was just ignorant. I just didn't know about these beautiful lands that are out there. And to some extent, every trip I take has given me a more open mind about another part of the world. And I hope that happens to a lot of travelers who watch a channel like this that's all about sharing cultures and bringing people together. I think a big part of the problem is a matter of scale. When it's one person and you travel somewhere that doesn't get a lot of tourists, you're almost always going to be welcomed. On the other hand, when there's 1,000 people who are coming every day and they're arriving in tour buses and they're leaving trash, and next thing you know, there's a Starbucks opening on the corner. And that, I think, is one thing we can remind ourselves as travelers. You are in someone else's home, shall we say. And when you're in someone else's home, it's good to be in best behavior. It's good to at least be thinking about what locals perceive when you arrive, and not just treating the world like a giant playground. As a traveler, as someone who's been to cities that are rapidly gentrifying, as someone who tries to meet local people, understand their needs, and be part of the solution, can I, in 2024, still use Airbnb and not recognize that I am part of the problem? Can you also use Airbnb or travel to cities like Barcelona, Montreal, Berlin, Lisbon? Can you go to these places and feel like you are giving back more than you are taking? Because clearly the idea is that tourists are taking from our community. Whereas traditionally it was like, oh, you're bringing revenue. That's how some people think. You're bringing money. And so what are they complaining about? Oh, maybe the housing prices go up, but you're all going to be richer. Not necessarily. The owners of these properties who are now making more money will be richer. The owners of those cafes and those restaurants who can charge more money for their coffees, they will make more money. But the random people will see their life get more and more difficult. I'd be curious to know if Airbnb and companies like Airbnb are actually beginning to recognize this problem as well. It's just wild. I remember, 10 years ago when Airbnb was first popping on the scene. It was seen as such a wholesome thing. It was just seen as come stay here and we'll have a coffee in the morning and I'll give you some tips for exploring my city. And now 10 years later, it's some rich dude from New York just being yeah, I just bought 4 Airbnbs in Lisbon and we tore down a townhouse and we're charging 1,200 euros each and we're putting in all this modern artwork. And it's just it's totally evolved into something very different than it initially was. And I've seen that change. You probably have as well. This issue itself is quite difficult, but it's one that I think travelers and travel creators like myself need to stare in the face. And we need to begin to think about global solutions, because I think, unfortunately, this problem will get worse before it gets better. Do you have any thoughts on this? Are tourists responsible for the economic well-being of the cities they visit? Or are the tourists who get hit by the water guns just unfortunate victims of a system that is much larger than themselves?